The first time I understood what my parents thought I was worth, I was standing in my grandmother's living room, staring at the empty space where her antique piano had stood for 30 years. Not cracked, not covered, not moved into storage. Gone. And the worst part was, I already knew where the money had gone. Into my sister's new car. Into a polished, gleaming future that had apparently mattered more than my grandmother's promise, more than memory, more than love, more than me. What my parents did not know, what they never even considered, was that I was done protecting them with my silence. Because 4 weeks earlier, my grandmother Eleanor had taken my hand in hospice, looked me straight in the eye, and told me the 1892 Steinway was mine. Not someday in a vague, sentimental way. Not as a sweet thing people say when they think time is endless. She meant it clearly, deliberately, in front of witnesses. And then my parents sold it for $95,000. They told themselves she was too sick to ever find out. They told themselves I was too soft to tell her. They were wrong. If quiet strength means something to you, subscribe. Power moves quietly. My name is Annabelle Thompson. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life I was the daughter people assigned things to. The one who showed up, the one who adjusted, the one who was expected to understand without ever being understood. My younger sister Megan was different. Megan was celebrated, protected, displayed. Everything in my family bent a little in her direction, as if the rest of us were furniture and she was the room. By the time my grandmother was admitted to hospice, that pattern was already old enough to feel permanent. I got the call on a Tuesday afternoon just after my last piano student left. "Your grandmother's been moved to hospice," my father said. No greeting, no softness. "Be at Street Catherine's in an hour. We need to discuss arrangements." Not grief, not fear. Arrangements. I should have known then that whatever was coming, I would be expected to carry the part no one else wanted. By the time I arrived at Street Catherine's, my parents and Megan were already gathered in the waiting area like they were preparing for a meeting, not facing the possibility of losing someone. My father stood with his arms crossed, posture rigid, controlled as always. My mother sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, her expression tight in a way that looked more like inconvenience than worry. Megan leaned against the wall, texting, barely glancing up when I walked in. No one hugged me. No one asked how I was holding up. "Good, you're here," my father said, as if I had just arrived late to something scheduled. "We need to divide responsibilities." Responsibilities, not feelings, not memories, not the fact that the woman who raised half of us was down the hall, slowly fading. "Someone needs to visit her daily," he continued. "Your mother and I have the business. Megan has commitments." He didn't need to say what kind. Megan's life had always been treated like an investment. Mine felt more like maintenance. "So, Annabelle," he said, turning to me like a decision had already been made. "You'll handle the visits. Your schedule is flexible." Flexible. That word again. As if teaching music to dozens of children every week, guiding them through something as fragile as confidence, was just empty space waiting to be filled. I could have argued. I could have said my time mattered too. But I didn't. "I'll go," I said quietly. Because the truth was, I wanted to. Just not like this. Not as the default option. "Perfect," my father said, already moving on. "Keep us updated if anything changes." As I turned toward the hallway leading to her room, I heard my mother's voice low, just enough to think I wouldn't catch it. "At least she's useful for something." I didn't stop walking. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was so used to that kind of hurt. It no longer surprised me, it just settled somewhere deeper. Grandma Eleanor's room smelled like lavender and old paper. She insisted on it, even here. "They try to make everything smell sterile," she told me later that evening, her voice soft but steady. "I won't have it. If I'm going to leave this world, I'll do it surrounded by things that feel like me." I sat beside her, taking her hand carefully. Her skin felt thinner than I remembered. But her grip, still certain. "How are you really feeling?" I asked. She studied me for a moment, the way she always did, like she could see past whatever I was trying to hide. "Tired," she said, but not confused. "Don't let anyone tell you that I am." Something in my chest tightened. Because I already knew someone would try. I started visiting her every day after that. Not because my father assigned it to me, but because it became the only place where I didn't feel like I had to shrink. The hospice room was small, quiet, and filled with things that didn't belong in hospitals. A folded quilt at the end of her bed, a stack of old music scores, a tiny glass bottle of lavender oil sitting by the window. It felt like her, not like the rest of my family. We didn't always talk about big things. Most days we talked about music, about the first time she played in a real concert hall, about the way an audience breathes differently when they're truly listening, about how she used to practice until her fingers ached not because she had to, but because she couldn't imagine not doing it. "You can always tell who plays for approval," she told me one afternoon, her eyes half closed, voice soft but steady. "And who plays because it's the only way they know how to exist." I smiled a little. Which one was I? She opened her eyes and looked at me fully. "You," she said, "never played to be seen. That's why they never understood you." That stayed with me. Because she didn't say I wasn't seen. She said they didn't understand. There's a difference. A few evenings later, as the light faded through the window, she reached for my hand again. "Annabelle," she said, more serious this time, "I need you to remember something." "Okay." "The piano." My chest tightened instantly. I knew which one she meant. Her mother's Steinway. The one that had been in that living room longer than I'd been alive. The one I learned my first scales on. The one that felt like the only place in that house where I wasn't an afterthought. "It's yours," she said clearly. Not softly, not vaguely. Firm. "I've already told your parents," she added. "I made it very clear." I swallowed. "You don't have to." "I want to." Her fingers tightened around mine, surprising in their strength. "You're the only one who understands what it carries," she said. "It's not just an instrument. It's history. It's discipline. It's truth." My eyes stung, but I held it together. "I'll take care of it," I said. "I know you will." She smiled then, but there was something else behind it, something I couldn't quite name yet. "Some things," she said quietly, "are worth more than money, and some people only learn that when it's too late." That line lingered in the room long after she closed her eyes to rest. At the time, I thought she meant it as a lesson. I didn't realize she meant it as a warning. 2 weeks later, something felt off. It wasn't one big moment. It was small things stacking quietly, the way they always had in my family. My father stopped mentioning my grandmother entirely. My mother avoided my questions with quick, polished answers that sounded complete but said nothing. And Megan. Megan suddenly had plans. Constantly. Important ones. The kind no one ever questioned. I didn't connect it right away. Not until that Thursday. Grandma had asked me to bring some old photographs from her house, pictures from her performing years. "The ones in the hallway drawer," she said. "I want to see them again." So after my last lesson, I drove there. I still had a key. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. Like something had been removed that mattered. I walked past the dining room, past the hallway, and into the living room. And stopped. The piano was gone. Not covered. Not moved aside. Gone. In its place was nothing but a pale rectangle pressed into the carpet, like a shadow that refused to disappear. For a second, I honestly thought I was in the wrong house. That I had somehow walked into a version of reality where that part of my life had never existed. Then my body caught up with what my eyes were seeing. My hands started shaking. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't even call out, even though there was no one there to answer. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom," I said, my voice already unsteady. "Where's Grandma's piano?" A pause. Not confusion. Not concern. Just calculation. "Your father handled that," she said casually. "It's taken care of." Taken care of. "What does that mean?" I asked, sharper now. "Where is it?" "You don't need to worry about that, Annabelle." My grip tightened on the phone. "I'm standing in the living room. It's gone." Another pause. Longer this time. Then her voice dropped slightly. Not softer, just colder. "Some things are adult decisions," she said. "You don't need to involve yourself in everything." I felt something inside me shift. Not break. Not explode. Just shift. "Did Grandma approve it?" I asked. Silence. That was my answer. "Mom," I said again, slower now. "Did she approve it?" "I have to go," she replied quickly. "We'll talk later." And then, click, the line went dead. I stood there in that empty room, staring at the outline of something that had held my entire childhood together. And for the first time, a thought came in clear, without hesitation. They didn't just take the piano, they assumed no one would stop them. I didn't stay in that house long. I couldn't. The silence had weight now. Every wall felt like it knew something I didn't, or worse, something I was only just beginning to understand. I got back into my car, hands still shaking, and drove straight to my parents' house. Not to argue, not even to yell, just to hear it from them, to see if they would say it out loud. My father opened the door holding a glass of scotch, like I had interrupted something far more important than whatever I had just lost. "Annabelle," he said, mildly annoyed. "This isn't a good time." "The piano," I said. No greeting, no build-up, just the truth sitting between us. His expression didn't change. He took a slow sip of his drink. "Sold it," he said. Just like that. Like he was telling me he returned a package. My ears rang. "You sold it?" I repeated. 95,000, he added. "Good price, considering the market." I stared at him, waiting for something else, explanation, hesitation, anything that sounded like awareness. Nothing came. "That piano was Grandma's," I said, my voice quieter now, but sharper. "She said it was mine." "Your grandmother is in hospice," he replied flatly. "She doesn't need a piano." Behind him, I heard movement. Then, the unmistakable sound of keys jingling. Megan appeared in the hallway, smiling. Bright, casual, untouched. She held up a sleek black key fob and gave it a little shake. "Guess what just arrived?" she said, like we were sharing good news. My stomach dropped. "No," I whispered. "Mercedes," she said, stepping closer. "Isn't it beautiful?" I looked back at my father. "You used the piano money." He shrugged. "Megan has a future to think about," he said. "Impressions matter, especially with Daniel's family." Daniel. Of course. Everything in this family bent toward what was useful, not what was right. "That wasn't yours to sell," I said. My mother's voice came from behind him now. "It was a practical decision," she said, arms crossed. "You wouldn't even have space for something like that." I blinked. "I would have made space." "For what?" she shot back. "You teach children songs after school, Annabelle. You're not performing at Carnegie Hall." There it was. Not just dismissal. Reduction. I felt heat rise in my chest, but my voice stayed level. "Does Grandma know?" Silence. A real one this time. Not avoidance. Not deflection. Just nothing. My mother stepped closer, her eyes locking onto mine. "She doesn't need to know," she said quietly. "You mean you don't want her to know?" Her expression hardened. "I mean," she said, her voice dropping, "that if you tell her and it causes stress and something happens, that will be on you." The words landed slowly, carefully, like they were meant to stay. "Do you want that?" she added. I stared at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt clear. This wasn't concern. It was control. And something in me finally stopped cooperating with it. If you've ever been made to feel like telling the truth makes you the problem, you're not wrong for noticing that. I took a breath. "Grandma has the right to know," I said. And this time, I didn't lower my voice. I left before they could respond. Not because I had nothing else to say, but because I finally understood something I hadn't been ready to admit before. They weren't going to hear me. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. That night, my apartment felt smaller than usual. Not physically, emotionally. Like every quiet corner was asking me the same question I'd been avoiding for years. How much of yourself are you going to keep giving away just to keep the peace? I sat on my couch, staring at the framed photo on my shelf. Grandma Eleanor at 60, sitting at the Steinway, back straight, hands resting on the keys, that look on her face, not performing, not posing, just present. Alive in a way I had never seen in anyone else. That piano wasn't just hers. It was where I first felt recognized. And now it was gone. Sold like it meant nothing. I pressed my hands together, trying to slow the thoughts that wouldn't stop circling. My mother's voice echoed the loudest. "If something happens, that will be on you." It was effective, because it sounded like responsibility. But underneath it, it was fear, placed carefully, deliberately. I stood up, pacing the small space. Would telling Grandma hurt her? Yes. There was no version of this where it didn't. But then another thought came, quieter. Would not telling her protect her? Or just protect them? I stopped walking, because that was the question I had never asked before. My whole life I had been trained to believe that silence was kindness. That absorbing things quietly made me good. That keeping the peace was the same as doing the right thing. But sitting there, alone, I started to see it differently. Silence wasn't neutral. Not anymore. Not this time. It had a direction. And right now, it was protecting the people who had taken something that didn't belong to them. I sat back down slowly, pulled my knees in, and let myself think about the past, not just today, but everything leading up to it. All the moments I said it's fine when it wasn't. All the times I stepped back so someone else could shine. All the times I accepted less because asking for more felt selfish. And where had that gotten me? Here, holding the weight of a decision no one else wanted to make. If you've ever been the one expected to carry what no one else will, you know how quiet that kind of pressure feels. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but inside, it changes something. By 3 a.m., I stopped pacing, stopped questioning, stopped negotiating with myself. Grandma deserved the truth, not a softened version, not a delayed version. The truth, even if it hurt, even if it complicated everything, even if it meant I would no longer be the easy one in the family. I set my alarm for early morning. I would go before work, before I had time to second-guess myself, before anyone could stop me. And as I finally lay down, staring at the ceiling, one thought settled in with a kind of quiet certainty I had never felt before. This wasn't about the piano anymore. It was about whether I was finally ready to stop disappearing. Grandma was already awake when I arrived. The morning light filtered softly through the window, casting a pale gold across her bed. She was propped up against her pillows, thinner than before, but her eyes, still sharp, still present. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said gently. I didn't pretend. I didn't. She studied me for a moment, the way she always had, not just looking, seeing. "Then don't wait," she said, "whatever it is." I pulled the chair closer and sat down, taking her hand carefully. It felt lighter than it used to, but still steady. "Grandma," I said, my voice tight, "I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt." She didn't flinch. "Then tell me the truth," she said simply. So I did. I didn't soften it. I didn't rearrange it. I didn't try to protect anyone, not even myself. I told her about going to the house, about the empty space in the living room, about the phone call with my mother, about the $95,000, about Megan's car, about the way my father said good price like it was nothing, about the silence when I asked if she had approved it, and finally, about the warning that if I told her and something happened, it would be my fault. My voice shook at first, then steadied. By the time I finished, the room felt completely still. I braced myself for shock, for heartbreak, for the kind of pain I had been told would break her. But Grandma Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't even look surprised. She closed her eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath. Not of pain, of recognition. "I see," she said quietly. I blinked. "That's it?" I whispered. I'm not shocked," she said, opening her eyes again. "I'm disappointed. There was a difference. A big one." "You knew?" I asked. "I knew it was possible," she corrected. "I've known your father a long time." Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. "I hoped I was wrong," she added. "But I didn't rely on hope." Something in my chest shifted again. "What does that mean?" I asked slowly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her head toward the small table beside her bed. "My phone," she said. I hesitated for a second, then reached over and handed it to her. Her movements were slower than before, but precise. Intentional. She scrolled through her contacts like she had done it 1,000 times. Then she stopped, pressed one name, and hit call. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. A man's voice came through, calm and steady. "Eleanor." "It's time," she said. No explanation. No build-up. Just those 2 words. A pause on the other end. "I understand," the man replied. "When?" "Sunday," she said. "At the house." Another pause. "I'll prepare everything. Thank you, Harold." She ended the call, set the phone down, and then looked back at me, with a calm I hadn't seen before. Not fragile. Not tired. "Certain, Grandma," I whispered. "What did you just do?" She gave the smallest smile. "The only thing left to do," she said. And for the first time since this all began, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe before. This wasn't falling apart. This was something being set in motion. I sat there, still holding her hand, trying to catch up to something she had clearly understood long before I did. Who was that? I asked. Harold Jennings, she said. My attorney. I blinked. You have an attorney? A faint smile touched her lips. I've had one longer than your father has had opinions, she said. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Almost. Why didn't I know that? I asked. Because, she said gently, not everything important needs to be announced. That landed deeper than I expected. I thought about how my father operated loud, certain, always declaring what he believed was his. And here was my grandmother, quiet, observant, prepared. How long? I asked. How long what? How long have you been planning something like this? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past me, toward the window, where the light had shifted slightly. 5 years, she said finally. 5 years. My breath caught. You've been expecting this for 5 years? I've been watching for 5 years, she corrected. There's a difference. I didn't know what to say, because suddenly everything I thought I understood about our family felt incomplete. I wanted to be wrong, she continued. I wanted your father to choose differently. I wanted your mother to speak up. I wanted your sister to grow into someone who understood the weight of what she was given. She paused. But wanting doesn't change behavior. Her eyes returned to mine. Patterns do. That word, patterns, hit something in me. Because I had been living inside one my entire life. And me? I asked quietly. Were you watching me too? Her expression softened. I was waiting, she said, to see if you would finally stop making yourself smaller, just to fit inside it. My throat tightened. I didn't know how, I admitted. I know, she said. That's why I had to make sure you would be protected when you finally did. Protected. Not rescued. Not saved. Protected. There was a difference there, too. What happens on Sunday? I asked. She leaned back slightly, the effort of the conversation beginning to show. Clarity, she said. That's all? That's enough. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I don't understand everything yet, I said. You don't need to, she replied. You just need to be there. She reached for my hand again. Dress in something that makes you feel like yourself, she added softly. Not the version of you they expect. A small pause. And bring your patience. I smiled faintly. The Chopin kind? Her eyes lit just for a second. The exact kind. If you're still listening, tell me where you are right now. What city? What moment? Some stories feel quieter when you hear them alone, but you're not alone in them. I sat with her until she fell asleep, her breathing slow, even peaceful in a way that didn't match the storm building just beneath the surface of everything. 5 years. She had been preparing for something for 5 years, and now it was 3 days away. I walked out of the hospice that morning feeling different. Not lighter, not calmer, but clearer. Like I had stepped out of a version of reality where I was always unsure, and into one where the truth was already decided. I just hadn't seen it yet. Sunday was coming, and whatever my parents thought they controlled was about to be seen for what it really was. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from a man who looked like he had never rushed a decision in his life. Harold Jennings' office was tucked into a quiet street just outside the city brick exterior. Narrow windows, nothing that tried too hard to impress. Inside, it smelled like leather, paper, and time. The kind of place where things were decided slowly and permanently. Annabelle Thompson, he said, standing as I entered. I've heard a great deal about you. His voice was calm, measured. Not warm exactly, but steady in a way that made you feel like nothing slipped past him. It's nice to meet you, I said, taking his hand. Please, he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit. I did. My hands were folded in my lap, but I could feel the tension in them. Not fear. Anticipation. Your grandmother asked me to meet with you before Sunday, he said, settling into his chair. She believes it's time you understand a few things. I nodded. I think I'm ready. He studied me for a moment, not judging, just assessing. Then he opened a folder on his desk. Let me ask you something first, he said. The house your parents live in, who owns it? That's theirs, I said automatically. My grandmother gave it to them years ago. He didn't react. Didn't correct me right away. Just let the answer sit there. Is that what you've been told? He asked. I hesitated. Yes. He reached into the folder and slid a document across the desk toward me. Then let's look at what's actually true. I glanced down. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I saw the name. Clear. Undeniable. Eleanor Whitmore. My grandmother. The property deed. No transfer. No amendment. No secondary name. Just hers. My breath caught. I started, then stopped. That's not possible. It's entirely possible, Harold said calmly. And entirely legal. I looked up at him. They've lived there for 10 years. Yes. They renovated the kitchen. They host events. They occupied the property, he interrupted gently. With permission, not ownership. The distinction hit harder than I expected. Permission, not ownership. I leaned back slightly, trying to process it. They think it's theirs, I said quietly. I'm aware, he replied. There was no judgment in his tone, just fact. Why would my grandmother let them believe that? I asked. He closed the folder slowly. Because she was watching, he said. The same word she used. Watching. Waiting, he added, to see if behavior would align with trust. I swallowed. And it didn't. No, he said. It didn't. A quiet settled over the room. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy with understanding. If you've ever realized that what someone told you your whole life wasn't actually true, you know how disorienting that feels. I looked back down at the document, at her name, at the reality that had been sitting in plain sight, just never shown to me. So what happens now? I asked. Harold met my eyes. Now, he said, we stop assuming and we start clarifying. Sunday suddenly didn't feel like a family gathering anymore. It felt like something else entirely. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. I didn't leave Harold's office right away. Even after he closed the folder, even after the room went quiet again, I just sat there, staring at the edge of the desk like something might rearrange itself if I looked long enough. It didn't. Annabelle, he said gently, there's more you should see. I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure I was ready. He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a second envelope. Older, slightly worn at the edges. This, he said, sliding it toward me, was prepared 5 years ago. 5 years. Again. I opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of a legal document, formal, precise, unmistakable. My grandmother's signature at the bottom, the date printed clearly beneath it, and clipped to the top. A small handwritten note. Her handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The house never left my hands, sweetheart. It was only ever borrowed. My throat tightened. I read it again, then again, and this time, the rest of the sentence settled in. Some people mistake access for ownership. I closed my eyes for a second, because suddenly, everything made sense in a way that felt both sharp and quiet at the same time. My father's confidence. My mother's entitlement. The way they spoke about things as if they were already decided. It had never been ownership. It had been assumption, carefully left uncorrected. Why now? I asked, my voice lower. Why is she choosing now to reveal all of this? Harold leaned back slightly, studying me with something that almost looked like respect. Because, he said, a line was crossed that couldn't be observed quietly anymore. The piano. Of course. That instrument, he continued, was listed specifically under protected assets. My heart skipped. Protected? Yes, he said. Part of a trust your grandmother established. Separate from what your family believes her estate looks like. I looked up sharply. A trust? He nodded. Designed to activate under certain conditions. What conditions? His gaze held mine. Misuse, he said. Misrepresentation. Or the assumption of authority where none was given. My chest tightened. They triggered it. They did. The room felt smaller somehow. Not physically. Just focused. And Sunday? I asked. Harold folded his hands on the desk. Sunday is not about confrontation, he said. It's about clarity. That word again. Not revenge. Not exposure. Clarity. I let that settle. Because it changed something. It meant this wasn't about destroying anyone. It was about removing what was false and letting what remained speak for itself. If you've ever had to face a truth that changes how you see everything, you know it doesn't feel loud. It feels still. I exhaled slowly. So what do I need to do? Be present, he said. Listen carefully. And when the moment comes, Don't step back from it. I nodded. For the first time, I understood my role. Not to fight. Not to defend. Just not to disappear. As I stood to leave, he added one more thing. Your grandmother didn't choose you by accident, Annabelle. I paused. She chose you, he said, because she knew you wouldn't confuse strength with noise. I didn't answer, but I carried that with me all the way home. Sunday was no longer something I feared. It was something I was finally ready to stand inside. The night before the party, my grandmother called me. Her voice was weaker than it had been even 2 days ago, each word carrying a kind of quiet effort, but her mind was still clear, sharper than anyone else in this entire situation. Annabelle, she said softly, are you ready for tomorrow? I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights, my reflection faint in the glass. I think so, I answered. Then after a pause, are you sure about this? A small breath came through the line. It needs to happen, she said. It's Mom's birthday, I added quietly. There are going to be a lot of people there. That's precisely why, she replied. Not harsh. Not emotional. Just certain. They made a decision in front of people, she continued. They presented it as something it wasn't. That deserves to be corrected in the same space. Corrected. Not punished. Corrected. I leaned my forehead lightly against the cool glass. This isn't revenge, is it? I asked. No, she said immediately. Revenge is loud and empty. This is alignment. I closed my eyes. Alignment. It sounded almost gentle, but I knew it wouldn't feel that way when it happened. They assumed I wouldn't notice, she added. That I wouldn't understand. That I wouldn't act. Her voice softened slightly. And they assumed you wouldn't speak. That part sat heavier. Because it was true. I almost didn't, I admitted. I know, she said, but you did. There was a quiet pride in her voice that I wasn't used to hearing directed at me. Do you trust me? She asked. Always. Then come tomorrow, she said. Wear something that makes you feel steady. Not impressive, not acceptable, just steady. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Okay. And Annabelle? Yes? No matter what happens in that room, she said. You are not the problem they made you feel like. My throat tightened instantly. Because that sentence, I had needed that sentence for years. We said goodnight not long after. She sounded tired. More than before. And when the call ended, I stood there for a long time, holding my phone, letting the silence settle around me. Tomorrow wasn't about winning anything. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about standing in the truth and not stepping away from it. If you understand what quiet strength feels like, you belong here. Subscribe. I picked out my dress carefully. Not for them. For me. Simple, navy, clean lines. The pearl earrings my grandmother gave me when I turned 21. Nothing loud. Nothing defensive. Just grounded. As I laid everything out, one thought stayed with me. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the version of myself they were used to. I would be the one my grandmother saw all along. Sunday arrived quietly. No storm, no warning. Just pale winter sunlight and air that felt a little too sharp against my skin. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people move in and out of the house like nothing had shifted beneath it. Like everything was still normal. It wasn't. The banners stretched across the front porch read, Happy 60th birthday, Diane. Bright, cheerful, unaware. Cars lined the street. Familiar ones, neighbors, extended family. A few people I recognized from my father's business circle. I took a breath, then another, and stepped out. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation, soft laughter, glasses clinking, voices layered over each other in that familiar way that always felt just slightly performative. My mother stood near the center of it all in a red dress, accepting compliments like she had earned them. My father moved through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, smiling at the right moments. Megan stood near the fireplace beside Daniel, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her posture effortless, confident, like nothing in her world had been handed to her without question. I moved quietly along the edge of the room, not hiding, just observing. And then my eyes went to the corner. The corner, where the piano used to be. In its place, a tall green plant, perfectly positioned, perfectly wrong. Like something had been erased and replaced with something that didn't ask questions. I felt it in my chest again. that hollow space. But this time, it didn't swallow me. It just reminded me. Aunt Margaret found me near the hallway. "Annabelle," she said softly, pulling me into a brief hug. "How is your grandmother?" "Tired," I said honestly, but clear. Margaret nodded slowly. "She always was," she murmured. Her eyes drifted toward the empty corner. "I noticed the piano is gone," she added. "Your father said your grandmother wanted to sell it." I looked at her, really looked. And for a second, I considered telling her everything right there. But, before I could answer, my father's voice cut through the room. "Everyone, if I could have your attention." The room quieted. Glasses lowered. Conversations paused. He stood near the center, one hand raised slightly, the other holding a drink. Controlled. Confident. Completely unaware. "Today," he began, "we celebrate 60 wonderful years of Diane Thompson." Applause followed. My mother smiled, glowing under the attention. "And," he continued, "we also have a small family announcement." Something in my chest tightened. Because I knew that tone. I had heard it before. It was the tone he used when he was about to tell a version of the truth that only benefited him. If you've ever watched someone rewrite a story in real time, you know how unsettling that feels. I stood still. Didn't move closer. Didn't step away. Just stayed. Because this time, I wasn't going to let the moment pass through me. This time, I was going to witness it, exactly as it was. And to celebrate not just Diane, my father continued, raising his glass slightly, but also the future of this family. There it was, that word, future, always pointed in one direction. "Megan has been building something very special," he said, gesturing toward her. "And as parents, we believe in supporting that." Megan smiled, leaning slightly into Daniel, who gave a polite nod. "And so," my father went on, "we wanted to give her a gift that reflects how proud we are." I felt it before I saw it. That shift in the room, that collective lean towards something about to be revealed. "Why don't we step outside?" he said. And just like that, the entire room began moving. Like this was the main event. Like this was what everyone had been waiting for. I followed more slowly, not because I didn't want to see, but because I already knew. The car sat in the driveway, polished silver, a red bow placed perfectly on the hood. A Mercedes. New. Untouched. Perfect. Gasps. Laughter. Phones lifting to take pictures. Megan's hands flew to her face in rehearsed surprise. "Oh my God," she said, breathless. "Dad, a gift," my father said, proud, composed. "Made possible by your grandmother's generosity." There it was. Not just the lie. The performance. "She decided," he continued smoothly, "that investing in your future mattered more than holding on to the past." A few people nodded. A few murmured approval. And just like that, the story had been rewritten. Again. I stood on the edge of the porch, completely still. Because this wasn't just about the piano anymore. This was about erasure. Taking something that had meaning, and replacing it with something that looked better in photos. Megan threw her arms around my father, laughing, glowing, stepping perfectly into the version of herself they had always wanted. "Come on, Anna," she called out suddenly, turning toward me. "Don't just stand there. Take a picture with me." Her voice was light, playful, like none of this touched me. Like it never had. "Don't be jealous," she added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure Grandma will leave you something too." A few quiet laughs from the crowd. Not cruel. Just unaware. I didn't move. Didn't step forward. Didn't smile. Because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to participate in something that wasn't true. If you've ever stood in a moment where everyone else accepted something that felt completely wrong, you know how isolating that silence can be. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. Then the soft click of a briefcase being set down. I didn't turn immediately. But I knew. Something had just entered the room that didn't belong to their version of the story. And it wasn't going to stay quiet. "Richard." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Clear enough to cut through the soft chatter still lingering around the driveway. My father turned, just slightly annoyed at the interruption. "Aunt Margaret," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Can this wait? We're in the middle of— Did you ask Eleanor before you sold that piano?" The question landed clean. No accusation in tone, no drama, just truth placed directly in the center of the moment. Everything slowed. Conversations didn't stop all at once, but they unraveled, one by one, like threads being pulled loose. My father's smile held for a second too long. "Mother is in hospice," he said smoothly. "She's not in a condition to manage these kinds of decisions. We did what was best." Margaret didn't move. "I spoke to her this morning," she said. "That shifted something. She's clear," Margaret continued. "Completely aware. And she told me you never asked her. You didn't even tell her." A ripple moved through the group. Subtle, but real. I saw it in the way people glanced at each other, in the way a few smiles faded. My mother stepped forward quickly. "Margaret," she said, her voice tight, "this is not the time. It's my birthday." Margaret looked at her. And for the first time since I arrived, someone else wasn't bending. "A piano that meant everything to your mother was sold without her consent," she said, "and the money was used for a car. If this isn't the time, Diane, when is?" Silence. Not awkward. Heavy. Because now, people were listening. My father exhaled slowly, his composure thinning just enough to notice. "This is a private family matter," he said. "There's no need to involve everyone." "Actually," a new voice said from behind us, calm and steady, "I believe there is." I turned. Harold Jennings stepped forward, his briefcase already open, a folder in his hand. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He just entered the moment like it had been waiting for him. "Good afternoon," he said, addressing the room with quiet authority. "My name is Harold Jennings. I represent Eleanor Whitmore." A pause. Then, something shifted completely. My father's face lost color. Not dramatically, just enough. "Since when does my mother have an attorney?" he asked, his voice tight. "Since long before this moment," Harold replied evenly. He moved toward the center of the room, toward that empty space where the piano used to stand. Deliberate. Everything about him was deliberate. "She has asked me," he continued, "to clarify several matters regarding her property and estate." My mother laughed softly, not amused. Defensive. "She's very ill," she said. "I don't think—" "I met with her this morning," Harold said, cutting gently through her sentence. "She is fully competent." That ended it. No raised voices. No argument. Just finality. If you've ever watched a moment where truth quietly replaces control, you know it doesn't need to be loud to change everything. Harold opened the folder. And just like that, the version of reality my parents had been standing on started to disappear. Harold didn't rush. He stood exactly where the piano used to be, as if even that choice had meaning, and carefully removed a single document from his folder. "Let's begin with something simple," he said. Simple. The word almost felt kind. "This," he continued, holding the paper up just enough for those closest to see, "is the legal deed to the property we are currently standing in." A few people leaned in slightly, curious, still not fully understanding. "Now," Harold said, his tone steady, "I'd like you all to note the name listed as owner." He paused. Not for effect, for clarity. Eleanor Whitmore. The name hung in the air, unchallenged, unmistakable. My father blinked once. Then again, "That's not possible," he said. Not loudly, but firmly, like saying it that way might make it true. "My parents were given this house years ago," he added. "Everyone knows that." "Given permission to live here," Harold corrected calmly. "Not ownership." The difference landed harder this time. Because now, there were witnesses. "You've resided in this property for approximately 10 years," Harold continued, "without paying rent, property tax, or maintenance costs, all of which have been covered by Eleanor Whitmore." A murmur moved through the crowd. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. I saw it in the small shifts, the way people repositioned themselves, the way their expressions changed just slightly. Because this wasn't just new information. It was a correction. And corrections don't feel good when you've been standing on something untrue. My mother stepped forward, her composure slipping. "That's ridiculous," she said. "We've invested in this home. We've maintained it. We've made modifications," Harold finished gently, "without legal authorization." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just stated. "And under Pennsylvania law," he added, "those modifications belong to the property owner, unless otherwise agreed upon in writing." Silence. Again. Deeper this time. Megan looked between my parents, confusion flickering across her face. "Dad?" she said quietly. "What is he talking about?" My father didn't answer. because there wasn't an answer that could hold under this kind of light. If you've ever watched something you believed in completely start to unravel piece by piece, you know how quiet that realization feels. Harold placed the document down on the table nearby. Not dramatically, just within reach. For clarity, he said, this home has never been transferred out of Eleanor Whitmore's name. And just like that, everything my parents had presented as permanent was revealed to be temporary, not taken, not stolen, just never truly theirs to begin with. No one spoke right away, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. I watched it happen in real time. That subtle shift when people stop seeing someone the way they used to. Mr. Harrison, who had been standing confidently beside my father just minutes ago, took a small step back. Not dramatic, not obvious, but intentional. Distance. Daniel's expression changed too. The easy confidence he wore earlier was gone, replaced by something tighter, more careful, measured, like he was recalculating. My father noticed. Of course he did. This is absurd, he said, his voice sharper now. You're misrepresenting something. My mother would have told us, if... She did not tell you, Harold said calmly, because she chose not to. That landed harder than anything else so far. Not confusion. Not oversight. Choice. My mother's voice broke slightly. Why would she do that? She asked. Harold looked at her, not unkindly, but without softness. Because trust, he said, is something she preferred to observe rather than assume. Silence. Again. Megan stepped forward this time, her composure slipping. This doesn't make sense, she said. We've lived here our entire adult lives. This is our home. Harold nodded slightly. It has been your residence, he said, but not your property. There it was again. That distinction. Clear. Precise. Unavoidable. I felt something shift inside me, not outwardly, not visibly, but internally. Because for the first time, the imbalance I had always felt had language. Not favoritism, not just unfairness, but structure. A system that had allowed certain people to take up space they were never actually given. If you've ever realized that what felt like power was actually just permission, you understand how quickly things can change. My father ran a hand through his hair. This doesn't change anything, he said quickly. We've maintained this house. We've built our life here. It changes ownership, Harold replied. Simple, direct, unmoved. And ownership, he added, is the foundation everything else rests on. That word, foundation, echoed, because I could see it now. Everything my father had built, his confidence, his image, his authority in rooms like this, had been standing on something that didn't belong to him, and now that foundation was visible, not broken, just not his. Harold reached into his folder again. There is, however, he said, a second matter that needs to be addressed. My chest tightened slightly, because I knew this wasn't over, not even close. This concerns a trust, he said. The word moved through the room quietly, but it carried weight. My father looked up sharply. What trust? Harold met his gaze. The one your mother established 5 years ago, he said. And just like that, the ground shifted again. What trust? My father repeated. But this time his voice didn't carry the same authority. It carried something else. Uncertainty. Harold didn't answer immediately. He reached into his briefcase again and removed a thicker document, multiple pages, neatly bound, precise in a way that felt final before a single word was even read. This trust, he said, was established independently from the will your family is familiar with. Familiar with, not informed about. A subtle difference, but it mattered. It was designed, he continued, to protect specific assets under certain conditions. My mother shook her head, already resisting. This is unnecessary, she said quickly. Whatever misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Harold said, still calm. There is documentation. That ended that. He turned a page, then another. And then, he looked up. 5 years ago, he said, Eleanor Whitmore placed the following assets into a protected trust. Her financial accounts, this property, and items of significant personal and historical value. My chest tightened, because I knew what was coming. The beneficiary of this trust, he continued, is designated as a single individual. A pause, not for effect. For truth. My father's gaze flicked toward Megan. Automatically. Of course it did. That beneficiary, Harold said, his eyes settling on me, is Annabelle Rose Thompson. The world didn't explode. There was no dramatic reaction. Just silence. The kind that presses in from all sides. What? Megan said, her voice sharp, almost disbelieving. That's not right. My father stepped forward. This is manipulation, he said. She's been influencing my mother. She's been… Careful, Harold said quietly. Just one word. But it stopped him. Every document presented here, Harold continued, has been reviewed, signed, and witnessed. There is no ambiguity. My mother's composure broke first. Tears filled her eyes, her voice trembling. She wouldn't do this, she said. Not to her family. Harold didn't respond right away. He let that statement exist in the space. Then, she did not do this to her family, he said. A pause. She did this for it. That landed differently, because it wasn't emotional. It was structural. This wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about boundaries. If you've ever realized that someone finally drew a line where there should have been one all along, you know it doesn't feel cruel. It feels overdue. Megan shook her head, stepping back. This is insane, she whispered. But no one echoed her. No one rushed to agree. Because now, everyone was seeing it. Not as a story, but as it actually was. And I stood there, in the center of it all, not feeling powerful, not victorious, just seen. For the first time in my life, not overlooked, not minimized, not explained away. Just acknowledged. The silence didn't break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like people were deciding in real time what they believed and what they no longer could. Megan was the first to speak again, her voice thinner now. So, what does that mean? She asked. Like, practically? Harold didn't look at her unkindly, but he didn't soften it either. It means, he said, that any asset within that trust cannot be sold, transferred, or used without proper authorization. A pause. And in the case of the Steinway piano, my chest tightened, because now we were there. The sale constitutes an unauthorized disposal of trust property. The words were clinical, but their impact wasn't. My father let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're telling me we sold a piano and now suddenly we're criminals? No, Harold said calmly. I'm telling you that you sold something you did not legally have the right to sell. That distinction again. Clear. Precise. Unavoidable. What happens now? My mother asked, her voice barely holding together. Harold turned a page. The proceeds of that sale, $95,000, must be returned to the trust. A ripple moved through the room again. Louder this time. More real. Returned? Megan repeated. It's already spent. Harold nodded once. Then the asset it was exchanged for must be liquidated. No one needed clarification. The Mercedes. Outside. Still sitting there with the red bow. Suddenly, it didn't look like a gift anymore. It looked temporary. If you've ever watched something shiny lose its meaning in a single moment, you know how fast reality can catch up. Megan's eyes filled with tears. My car? She said, her voice breaking. You're taking my car? I'm not taking anything, Harold replied. I'm outlining the consequences of actions that have already occurred. My father's voice came out sharper now. We don't have $95,000 just sitting around. Then I would advise, Harold said evenly, that you take steps to recover what you can from the vehicle. Outside, someone's phone was still recording. No one had told them to stop, and no one moved to, because this wasn't a scene anymore. It was a correction. My eyes moved briefly toward Daniel. He had stepped back, further than before, and his father, Mr. Harrison, was no longer looking at mine. He was looking at my father, very differently, not as a partner, but as a risk. And just like that, something else began to fall apart. Not loudly, not dramatically, just inevitably. If respect matters, subscribe, because this moment, this quiet shift, wasn't about punishment. It was about consequence. And consequence doesn't need volume to change everything. No one moved to congratulate Megan anymore. The car sat outside, unchanged but no longer admired. Inside, the room had shifted into something quieter, heavier. My father looked smaller somehow, like the certainty he had carried for years no longer fit him. My mother stood still, her hands clasped too tightly, as if holding onto something that had already slipped away. Megan wiped her tears, but she didn't argue again. Because there was nothing left to argue with. This wasn't opinion. It was structure. Harold closed the folder slowly. There will be time to arrange repayment, he said. But the terms will be formal, documented. Not punishment. Process. I felt Aunt Margaret's hand rest lightly against my back. Steady. Grounding. And for the first time that afternoon, I noticed something clearly. No one was looking past me anymore. They were looking at me. Not as background. Not as the quiet one. But as someone who finally couldn't be overlooked. The room didn't recover. Conversations didn't restart the way they usually do after an awkward moment. People began to leave quietly, offering polite goodbyes that didn't quite land. Mr. Harrison shook my father's hand, but it was brief, distant. Daniel followed without meeting Megan's eyes. That told me everything. My father didn't chase after them. For once, he stayed still. Harold gathered his documents with the same calm precision he'd had from the beginning, then turned to me. "When you're ready," he said quietly, "we'll discuss next steps." I nodded. Not overwhelmed. Not unsure. Just clear. Across the room, my mother finally looked at me, but there was no accusation left in her expression, only something unfamiliar. Recognition. And maybe regret. If you've ever had a moment where people finally see you differently, tell me what that felt like for you.